Okay, here's our second video on cells, cells part two. It says part two, right? We're going to talk about the cell structure today and specifically animal cells. So, the last video we talked just basically what cells are, and we also talked about some bacteria and viruses. So, let's talk about the cell structure. And again, we're going to be talking it with animal cells. But right now, you can see we have an animal cell right there and we have a plant cell right there. So, what do you think the difference is? Besides the color and stuff. Do you see a noticeable difference in the plant cell? Well, if you noticed, the plant cell, has a cell wall, has this rigid structure that supports the cell, right? The cell wall supports the cell, right? So why don't we have one? Why don't animals have cell walls? So remember, animal cells do not. We do not have cell walls. And that's an easy question, right? We do not have cell walls. Plants have cell walls, and some bacteria have cell walls. So if you wanted to get the shape, they support the shape of the plant. We don't need them because we have what? Guess what we have? Animals. We have bones. So that's why we don't need cell walls. We have bones, right? So again, plants have cell walls, animals do not have cell walls. Okay, and here are the principles of cell theory. There's three of them we want to talk about. And let's use green. Why not? Why don't you? So the first one is all living things, right? Not rocks, but all living things have cells. All living things have cells. Plants, animals, bacteria, they all have cells. They're made up of cells. And remember, if you remember from last video, we have over 30 trillion cells in our body. 30 trillion cells. Keep that in mind. So all living things are made up of cells. They have cells. That's the first thing. Number two, cells are the basic, and we talked about this in the last video also. They're the basic units of structure and function. I'm going to talk about structure today. Structure and function in living things, right? In living things, the cell, right? So we'll talk about function of the cell in another video. This video, we're going to talk about structure. So just basically, you should know function is what its job is, right? What's its function? Like your job is to learn science as a student, or what's a chair's job, right? A chair's job, its function, right, is for you have a place where someone could sit, right? That's a chair's function. It's a bad chair, right? But you get the drift, right? And now number three, we'll put number three over here. Let's change the color, right? A little purple to the right. All new cells that are made, guess what? They are produced from existing cells, right? So those are the three things, right? If you want to pause the tape to go over them again, all living things have cells. All living things are made up of cells. Two, the basic unit of structure and function in living things is the cell. And all new cells are produced from existing cells. And there are other smaller structures in the cell, just like inside of us, we have organs and such, which are made up of tissues, which are made up of cells, and we'll go into that. But all cells have smaller structures that serve certain functions that we'll talk about. So we know cells, they keep us alive. Without cells, we wouldn't be alive. Without cells, we wouldn't be us, right? So just like a house needs wood for its frame, or bricks if you have a brick house, right? We need cells. Cells make us. And so they have a function, which we'll talk about in the next video. But we're going to be talking about the structure of the cell. What is the cell made up of? And again, we're talking animal cells in this video. Animal cells. All right. So let's look at some of the parts of the cell. Okay, so if we look at the first, and by the way, all these parts of the cell, the animal cell, they're called organelles, right? So I'll write that down. We'll stay with purple. Why not? So they're called organelles. Organelles, right? So organelles are just these parts of the cell. So the first one we'll talk about right here, the cell membrane. Now, again, animal cells do not have a cell wall, but they have a cell membrane. And the cell membrane is like a guard. It's like a guard at the gate. Guard at the gate, right? So what do you think that means? Guard at the gate. So it does protect the cell. It definitely it talks about what substances can come in. Well, it doesn't talk about it, but it regulates what comes in and out of the cell, right? So it controls or controls what comes in and out of the cell, right? Like a guard. If you don't have the right stuff, you're not coming in, right? Sometimes they can get fooled, like viruses. They can come in, right? They fool the guard at the gate. So again, the cell membrane protects the cell. It's that coating on the outside that protects the cell, and it controls what comes in and out of the cell. Again, the cell needs water, it needs nutrients, and it needs to get rid of waste. So that's what the cell membrane does. And the next one over here is cytoplasm, right? It's a gel-like substance, right? And it helps, it moves nutrients around the cell. It helps move, it's like water helps move things around. This is like a gel-like substance. It keeps some organelles in place, and it moves nutrients in the cell. That's what the cell membrane does. Well, not cell membrane, the cytoplasm. So again, cytoplasm is a gel-like substance. It moves nutrients, it moves proteins and nutrients around the cell, right? Nutrients in the cell. And that's that this yellow, it's colored in yellow, but it's all over the cell. So it kind of keeps its shape, kind of fills the cell up, and it moves proteins and nutrients in the cell, and other organelles are kept in place because of the cytoplasm. Okay, let's use another color. Why not we use yellow? Well, let's see. For the mitochondrion. No, that's too bright. Too bright. Too bright. We'll go back. Well, we'll use that color. Why not? So mitochondria, they look at these things. They look like kind of cockroaches, right? If we can put some whatever you think they're called, right? And the little arms there, or ticks, right? You don't want ticks, right? So mitochondria, they're the energy powerhouse of the cell. They're the energy powerhouse. They're like a battery, like a battery, right? So the cell needs energy, and it gets it from the mitochondria. And when we talk about genetics, we'll talk more about mitochondria. You only get your mitochondria DNA from your mother's side. So your mother, your grandmother, your great grandmother, your aunts from your mother's side, and all that stuff you get from your mother's side, your maternal side. We'll talk about that when we talk about genetics. All right. Okay, which one should we pick? Doesn't matter, right? We'll talk about the ribosome since we were talking about genetics. The ribosome makes proteins. These are vital, right? Proteins are vital. We'll talk about proteins and carbohydrates and all that other stuff in other videos. But the ribosomes make proteins. That's where your mRNA will go. They'll go into the ribosomes and will create proteins for your body, right? And we'll talk about DNA later on in another video. Now the ER right here, the endoplasmic reticulum, say that 3 times, endoplasmic reticulum, that's twice, and endoplasmic reticulum, the ER. So let's clear some stuff up here. Clear some screens up. Go back if you need to write stuff down. So the endoplasmic reticulum, or the ER for short, they make proteins, they make lipids, which are fats. So the endoplasmic reticulum, right? We'll say the ER. They make proteins, just like the ribosomes. They actually make proteins because the ribosomes are inside the ER. Most ribosomes are in the ER, and some are in the cytoplasm. So they make proteins, they make lipids, which are fats. Lipids are fats, right? And they also store energy. So they have a vital function there, right? So mitochondria, they convert energy coming in from the food energy coming in, and they convert it for energy to use for the cell. And then so the ER will store that energy. The ribosomes make proteins. Cytoplasm is a gel-like substance, we said. It kind of fills out the cell, and the organelles kind of sit within that, gives it shape. And we all talked about the cell membrane is like a guard at the gate so far. All right. Let's look at the Golgi apparatus, right? So over here, they're calling it the Golgi body. It's also called, let's put a little line over there, the Golgi apparatus. Golgi apparatus. And sometimes, again, like some books might say, the Golgi body. But it's the Golgi apparatus, and it's like a warehouse. You know, like FedEx has a warehouse, or UPS and Amazon has these warehouses. So they store, guess what they store? Something very vital in your body is protein. So they store proteins like a warehouse. They store proteins for later use. Right? The proteins go to the Golgi apparatus, and then they'll be directed from the Golgi apparatus because they're going to package proteins. It's almost like packaging in a warehouse. They'll package proteins and to be shipped. To BB. Why not put 2BB? To be shipped all over the body. Right? So think of the Golgi apparatus as a warehouse where they store proteins. Okay, let's look at a very important part. They're all important, right? But let's look at the nucleus of the cell. So you'll hear that the nucleus, I'll use blue. So the nucleus is like the brain, right? It's like the brain of the cell. You can always see it's always in the middle. And it's going to control how the cell grows and so forth, how it grows. It also contains our genetic material, right? Our DNA. DNA. And RNA. So it contains our genetic material, our genes, our chromosomes, which we'll talk about in another video when we talk about genetics. So that's where everything is. It's like a brain center of our cell. And so our blueprint, our deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA, it's our blueprint to make us, right? And we'll talk about that again in another video. So that's where the nucleus, the DNA is in the nucleus, and we have our chromosomes, we have our genes. We'll talk all about that information in another video. And then you can see this little thing here, the nucleolus. What a great name, the nucleolus. Okay, and we'll use red. So the nucleolus, bring it over here. Its primary function is to make, and the word you're going to hear for make is synthesize, right? Synthesize is to make, right? To synthesize our RNA, right? There's many types of RNA. There's messenger RNA, which helps building proteins, and so does our RNA, right? So the messenger RNA, and we'll talk about this in other videos, it comes out of the nucleus, and it joins the ribosomes, and then the rRNA help in protein synthesis, right? And again, synthesis is making, that's what it is. It means to make, right? So that's the job of the nucleolus. Wow, a little tongue-tied today. So again, the nucleolus, its primary function is to make rRNA. Just think of RNA, and we'll talk more about what RNA is and the different types of RNA. But briefly, just to get you understanding this, first you have messenger RNA, so it has this little M and then RNA, right? Which they're going to code in your genes. It's going to code certain protein nucleotide bases, and it's going to then, the mRNA is going to go to the ribosome, and then in the ribosome, the rRNA is going to help synthesize proteins. And again, we'll go all over that in another video when we talk about genetics, RNA, and DNA. So this is deoxyribonucleic acid is DNA, and ribonucleic acid is RNA. And so again, the nucleolus, it synthesizes rRNA. Okay. And the one we are missing now is the centriole. Do not say centriole, like some kind of Italian dish, but the centriole, we'll put it over here. So its job is in cell division, which we're going to talk about very soon in another video. Cell division is when cells create new cells. Remember, all cells come from existing cells. We talked about that. So the centriole is very vital in that. It's going to create these spindle fibers, which we'll talk about when we talk about cell division. Now, we also have the lysosome, and we're missing, in this picture, we're missing another organelle. When you think of the lysosome, bring it over here and let's change it. Go back to purple. Think of a recycle center. That's one of its jobs, right? It recycles old cells, old parts, right? Anything that's not working right, the lysosome's job is to recycle it. That's the lysosome's job. What's missing here now is the vacuole. So let's get a better picture. All right, and there's the vacuole, and the pen back up there. By the way, the lysosome also, not only is it a recycle center, let's write that again, it also helps with invading things, right? Anything invading the cell, it'll help with invading things. Doesn't help invade, it helps anything invading the cell. So we can say they destroy, it's a better word, right? Destroy, seek and destroy. They destroy anything invading the cell. That's the job of the lysosome. So they have a big job. Now the vacuole, right there, and they're much, much bigger in plants. So they look very small here. They look like these little lakes. And why not bring it over here? And we'll use blue for the water, right? So guess what they do? I mean, you're seeing it looks like lakes, right? They do store water for the cell. They store water, and they also store waste. So the cell needs water. They also destroy. No, that's the lysosomes. They also store waste, right? So and food for the cell, right? So they're going to store water. They're going to store food for the cell, and they can store waste, right? So those are the organelles for an animal cell. And in the next video, we'll talk about the organelles in a plant cell. All right, so let's put up, what should we put up today? Let's put up a sticker. We'll put up a little, who knows, we'll put that there for some reason. Who knows, put a couple, right? All right, so great job.